Robert, everyone. Elizabeth's voice rang out, sweet but cold as ice, cutting through the warm atmosphere of the party under the golden glow of the lights. She stood up, raising her glass, her eyes sparkling yet resolute. No one could have anticipated that in this romantic setting. A table draped in white silk, red roses arranged in the shape of a heart, and the sound of lively laughter. Such words would echo. I have something to share. She paused, her gaze sweeping over each bewildered face. I want a divorce. I need a new life, a fresh start, freedom. The room fell silent, as if someone had snuffed out every sound. The faint clinking of cutlery abruptly stopped. Stunned gazes darted toward me, then back to Elizabeth, waiting for an explosive reaction, a burst of anger, a shout, or at the very least a glass of wine flung across the room. But I just stood there, calm, silent. I am Robert Grayson, 53 years old, and I knew this moment was coming. In fact, I had been preparing for it for a long time. The glass of red wine in my hand trembled slightly, not out of anger, but because the moment of liberation had finally arrived. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan, my younger brother, sitting at the table nearby. His hand gripped his glass so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He avoided my gaze, but I didn't need to look to know. I always knew. Ethan and Elizabeth. The brother I had carried through years of hardship, the one I trusted as my own flesh and blood, turned out to be the one who quietly plunged the deepest knife into my back. And tonight, at the very celebration of our 25th wedding anniversary, they chose to lay it all bare. But I didn't get angry. I didn't need to. I only gave a faint smile, calm, deliberate, and enough to make those who knew me shiver. Elizabeth, I said in a low voice that resonated through the hushed room. Thank you for being honest. I slowly pulled a gray envelope from my suit pocket and placed it gently in her hand. You should read this later. No need to rush. She blinked, her hand freezing on the envelope, a flicker of unease flashing in her eyes. Ethan bowed his head, trying to hide his anxiety. I turned to the guests, who were still gaping in shock. Thank you all for coming, especially Daniel, my son, I said, looking at the boy. No, the 24-year-old man who had just been promoted, sitting there with a pale face. I'm proud of you, Daniel. Very proud. Then I walked away. Not quickly, not slowly. Each step was measured, as if I were leaving an ordinary party, not the place where my entire life had just been torn apart. I felt Elizabeth's and Ethan's eyes following me, sharp as arrows, but they couldn't touch me. Not yet. Outside, the cool night air hit my face. I stood on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath, letting the scent of night-blooming flowers mingle with the smoldering anger in my chest. I had seen this coming months ago, the secret texts, the glances between them, the times Elizabeth was busy with late meetings when she was actually with Ethan. I'm not a fool. I've never been a fool. That gray envelope? It was the opening move. Inside was the divorce petition, meticulously prepared by my lawyer based on the prenuptial agreement Elizabeth had signed 25 years ago. The infidelity clause: she would lose everything. The house, the assets, even the reputation she valued more than me. I stepped into the car, closed the door, and told myself, Elizabeth, Ethan, you think you've won. But this game, I'm the one holding the pieces. I drove through the bustling streets, neon lights streaking past the windshield like faint, hazy trails of light. My heart was still pounding, but not out of pain. Not exactly. The anger inside me didn't blaze like fire. It was cold, sharp, and honed like a blade I'd been sharpening for months. Elizabeth and Ethan thought they had defeated me, but they didn't know I had seen everything long ago. And I had prepared. I'm not the jealous type. In 25 years of marriage, I had learned to trust Elizabeth even when she grew distant, even when her smiles became forced. But 6 months ago, a small detail woke me up. A message popped up on her phone when she forgot to lock the screen. I miss you. Tonight, 8? The sender was Ethan, my brother. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Ethan, the brother I had bailed out of debt, the one I let stay in our home when he went bankrupt, couldn't do this. But then the pieces started falling into place. The times Elizabeth went on business trips but never shared details. The small but regular withdrawals from our joint account, which she claimed were for miscellaneous shopping. And Ethan's eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at me whenever he came over. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. Instead, I acted. I hired a private investigator, a discreet middle-aged man named Carl, who asked few questions and worked efficiently. Within 2 months, Carl brought me photos. Elizabeth and Ethan hand in hand at a suburban cafe, then at a hotel, then in an apartment I assumed they had planned for their new life. I reviewed those photos in my small office, each one like a cut, but I didn't crumble. I turned the pain into a plan. I revisited the prenuptial agreement, the one Elizabeth had signed without reading carefully 25 years ago when we were young and she just wanted to rush into married life. She had once said, "I don't care about your money, Robert. I just want a happy family." How ironic that those words would now become the oath leading to her downfall. The agreement clearly outlined a clause regarding infidelity. If one of us betrayed the other, the wronged party would keep all shared assets, including the $2 million house and the retirement account. After reviewing the contract, I contacted my lawyer, Karen, a sharp woman with eyes that seemed to see through every lie. "Robert," she said, "we'll make them pay. But we have to be certain." I dug deeper. I discovered Elizabeth had transferred nearly $50,000 to a secret account, undoubtedly to support Ethan, who had never learned to stand on his own. She bought him gifts, watches, suits, even a sports car he bragged about buying himself. I kept every receipt, every transaction, and sent them to Karen. Each piece of evidence was a bullet, and I was loading the chamber. The night before the anniversary party, I sat in my study, the desk lamp casting light on the divorce petition already signed. Karen had filed it with the court that morning, but I wanted Elizabeth to declare it herself first. I knew she would. She loved drama, loved being the center of attention. The gray envelope I handed her tonight wasn't just the divorce petition, it also contained a copy of the financial transactions and a photo. Her and Ethan kissing in a car. I wanted her to open it alone, to see her face drain of color when she realized I knew everything. The car stopped in front of the house. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness for a moment. My breathing slowed, but my mind was still racing. Elizabeth and Ethan thought they had won, but they didn't know the game had started long ago. And I, Robert Grayson, never play without a strategy. I opened the door to the house and walked into my study, where the desk lamp cast light on old photos on the shelf. One showed Elizabeth and me at our wedding, her radiant smile in a white dress, and me, with jet black hair, looking at her like she was the entire world. Another captured Daniel at 3 years old, perched on my shoulders, grinning ear to ear by the seaside. Those moments once meant everything to me. But now, looking at them, I only saw what I had sacrificed. I never told anyone about my dream. When I was young, I wanted to start a tech company focused on renewable energy. I had plans, blueprints, even an investor ready to fund it. But then Elizabeth got pregnant with Daniel and everything changed. She panicked, saying she couldn't raise a child alone, that she needed me by her side. I nodded, set my dream aside, and took a stable accounting job. "Just a few years," I told myself, "then I'll get back to it." But a few years turned into a lifetime. Elizabeth wanted to change careers, from teaching to marketing, a field she called her true passion. I supported her, paid for her courses, and looked after Daniel every evening so she could study. When she lost her first job, I worked overtime to make up for it. When she wanted a bigger house, I gritted my teeth and signed the loan, knowing I'd have to work myself to exhaustion to pay it off. I didn't complain. I loved her. I loved Daniel. I thought that was a man's duty. I managed everything: accounts, bills, Daniel's college fund. Elizabeth called me the family's rock, but she didn't see that the rock was wearing down. Each year I watched my dream slip further away. The blueprints gathered dust in the garage. The investor from back then is now a millionaire, but he no longer remembers me. I told myself, as long as the family's okay, I'm okay. But Elizabeth didn't see. She didn't see the nights I stayed up, calculating every cent to ensure Daniel could attend a good school. She didn't see me turn down a job offer abroad where I could have built a bigger career just because she said the family needs stability. And she certainly didn't see the times I looked at Ethan, my irresponsible brother, and wondered why I always had to be the one to sacrifice. Now sitting here, I gripped the family photo tightly. The pain wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I had poured my entire life into something that wasn't real. Elizabeth and Ethan thought they had taken everything from me, but they forgot one thing. A rock doesn't break easily, and when it rolls, it crushes everything in its path. I returned to the living room and sank into the armchair. The clock showed midnight, but I wasn't sleepy. The gray envelope I had given Elizabeth at the party, she must have read it by now, and I knew she would come. She always loved making a scene, especially when backed into a corner. I took a sip of whiskey, the bitter taste sliding down my throat, and waited. The doorbell rang, sharp like a scream. Elizabeth stormed in, her hair disheveled, eyes red and swollen, the crumpled envelope in her hand. Ethan lurked behind her, head bowed, but I saw his hand clenched as if trying to suppress a tremble. "Robert!" Elizabeth snapped. "What the hell is this?" She held up the divorce petition, her voice shaking but trying to sound defiant. "You think you can ruin me?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved blindly, the one I had sacrificed every dream to keep happy. Then I looked at Ethan, the brother I had treated like family, now just a coward hiding behind his lover. I stood up slowly, letting the silence weigh on them. "Ruin?" I said, my voice low but sharp. "You did that to yourself, Elizabeth. You and Ethan." She blinked, stepping back half a pace. You knew?" Her voice cracked, but I didn't stop. I pulled a stack of documents from the drawer, photos, receipts, messages. I tossed them onto the table, each sheet landing like a knife. The hotel on Maple Road, the apartment in the suburbs, the sports car you bought for Ethan, $50,000 from our joint account. Did you think I was blind? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Elizabeth, his eyes frantic. "Liz, you said no one knew," he stammered, and I almost laughed. They hadn't even coordinated their lies. Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes blazing with anger. "Shut up, Ethan, he's bluffing." "Bluffing?" I stepped forward, pointing at the documents. "The prenuptial agreement, Elizabeth, the infidelity clause. You lose the house, the assets, everything. And Ethan," I looked at him, "you thought you'd live comfortably off your sister-in-law's money? That apartment? The lease was never signed. Your credit is in the negative." Elizabeth's face went pale, her hands trembling. Ethan backed away as if wanting to flee. "Robert," she whispered, "we can talk. For Daniel's sake. Don't drag my son into this." I cut her off, my voice ice cold. "You betrayed him, not me. Get out of my house, now." They stood there silent like two shattered statues. Then Elizabeth turned, pulling Ethan toward the door. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the quiet house. I sat back down, still holding the whiskey but not drinking. This battle I had won. But the bigger battle in court was just beginning. The new day had dawned, sunlight filtering through the window, casting a golden hue on the coffee cup in my hand. Last night, after Elizabeth and Ethan left, I didn't sleep. Not out of anger, I had moved past that, but because I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. Then the doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, there was Daniel, my son, standing there, his eyes red but his jaw set, as if he were ready to face the world. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice hoarse but firm, "I know everything. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." He stepped inside and hugged me, a hug so tight I could feel his pain. Daniel, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, was now a man, and he chose to stand by me. "Mom and Uncle Ethan." He paused, shaking his head. "I can't believe it, but Dad, I'm here. I'll always be here." I patted his shoulder, holding back tears. "You don't need to apologize, Daniel. I'm proud of you." We sat down, and I told him, not to boast, but because he deserved the truth. about the months I quietly gathered evidence, about the prenuptial agreement, about my plan. Daniel listened, sometimes clenching his fists, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said only, "You did the right thing, Dad. They don't deserve you." That afternoon, an old friend, Mark, came by. Mark was the straightforward type, the one who had warned me about Ethan 2 years ago when he noticed him lingering too close to Elizabeth. "I told you, Rob," Mark said, handing me a beer. "Your brother was never trustworthy, but I didn't expect Liz." He stopped, shaking his head. "You're not alone. Me, my wife, and a few others, we've got your back. Just say the word if you need anything." Mark's words and Daniel's hug were like a surge of strength. I was no longer a man alone in this house. I had a family, not the one I once thought I had, but the people who truly chose me. And as I looked out the window, seeing the sunlight spill onto the old oak tree, I knew I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for Daniel, for Mark, and for myself. As for Elizabeth, she had hastily rented a small apartment after our confrontation. The cramped room, cluttered with boxes, was far from the new life she had dreamed of. On the table, the stack of documents I had given her still sat, each page like an accusation. Ethan sat across from her, his hair disheveled, eyes ringed with dark circles. Gone were the stolen kisses and passionate glances. All that remained was suspicion. "You said no one knew," Ethan snapped, his voice high-pitched, almost frantic. "You said that account was safe, that we could start over. Now what? Robert has everything, photos, messages, that damn contract." Elizabeth slammed her hand on the table, her eyes flashing. "Don't blame me, Ethan. You think I wanted this? You're the one who kept demanding more money, more gifts, that stupid car." She stood, pointing at him. "If you hadn't been so careless, Robert wouldn't have found out." I wasn't there, but I knew this scene unfolded. Carl, my investigator, was still tailing them, and he recounted it in a brief call. Elizabeth and Ethan were tearing each other apart, just as I had predicted. I had planted a small detail in the documents, a transaction Elizabeth hadn't told Ethan about, $10,000 she had kept for herself unshared. When Ethan discovered it, his trust shattered. "You were going to ditch me, weren't you?" he shouted, according to Carl. The tension escalated when Ethan learned the apartment they planned to rent together had fallen through. His credit, as I had pointed out, was a mess. Elizabeth, accustomed to me handling the finances, hadn't anticipated this. "We have nothing, Liz," Ethan yelled, punching the wall. "No house, no money, and now our reputations are gone." Elizabeth sank into a chair, hands covering her face. She knew I was right. Friends, family, the people who once admired her, had turned their backs. News of the betrayal spread like wildfire, a blaze I had ignited. Ethan, who had relied on her, started packing his things. "I'm done," he muttered, not looking back. Meanwhile, I sat in my office listening to Carl's report and smiled. I didn't need to lift a finger. They were destroying each other, but I wasn't done. The upcoming court hearing would be the final blow. A few days later, I was in the courtroom, seated in the front row, hands resting on my thighs, eyes fixed on the judge. The air was cold, carrying the scent of old wood and paperwork. Karen, my lawyer, sat beside me, a thick stack of documents in front of her, each page a bullet I had prepared over months. Elizabeth sat across the room, her eyes downcast, her neatly tied hair unable to hide her haggard appearance. Ethan wasn't there. He lacked the courage, or he was no longer relevant. I didn't care. The judge, a middle-aged woman with eyes sharp as knives, flipped through the file. "Mr. Grayson, Mrs. Grayson," she said, her voice even but authoritative. "Today we are reviewing the divorce petition and the division of assets." Karen stood, her voice clear, slicing through the air like a blade. "Your Honor, we request the enforcement of the prenuptial agreement, specifically the infidelity clause. We have irrefutable evidence of Mrs. Grayson's violation." I listened as Karen presented the case, each piece of evidence landing like a punch. Photos of Elizabeth and Ethan, text messages, financial transactions. Every word she spoke chipped away at Elizabeth's facade of composure. Elizabeth tried to hold her head high, but her eyes darted away, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her lawyer, a young man who looked flustered, stammered through a weak rebuttal. But it lacked conviction. The prenuptial agreement which Elizabeth had signed without reading carefully 25 years ago was now a noose around her neck. The judge nodded, turning to the final page. "This agreement remains legally binding," she declared. "The infidelity clause is clear. Mrs. Grayson, you forfeit ownership of the marital home and the majority of the shared assets. The joint accounts will be frozen. You will have access only to your personal account." Her voice was cold, devoid of sympathy. Elizabeth blinked, her hands gripping the chair tightly, but she said nothing. I looked at her, not with joy, but with a hollow feeling. This victory wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. Karen gave my shoulder a light pat as we left the courtroom. "Step 1 is done, Robert," she said. "The final hearing will just be a formality." I nodded, but my mind was already on what came next. Not revenge, but a new life. After the hearing, Elizabeth stood before a mirror in her cramped apartment, her eyes vacant. The money in her personal account would only sustain her for a few months, and her reputation, the thing she had once prided herself on, was gone. Friends who had once fawned over her lavish parties now avoided her. Her family, especially her sister, called her a traitor and cut contact. Rumors about her affair with Ethan spread through the town like an unstoppable wildfire. She tried calling Ethan, but his number was disconnected. Ethan, meanwhile, was drifting in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. He no longer had the sports car or the suits Elizabeth had bought him. His credit, as I had pointed out, was a disaster, and no one was willing to help. He tried reaching out to old friends, but they turned their backs, partly out of shame, partly because they knew he had been living off Elizabeth. He sent me a long, desperate text. "Brother, I was wrong. Please talk to me." I read it, then deleted it. He was no longer my brother. Carl, my investigator, reported that Elizabeth and Ethan had stopped communicating. Their final argument right after the preliminary hearing had destroyed whatever remained between them. Ethan shouted that she had dragged him into the mud while Elizabeth sobbed, calling him a mistake. They parted ways, not with anger, but with the emptiness of those who had lost everything. Meanwhile, I sat in my office, looking at the first blueprint for my tech company. Daniel called, his voice excited, asking about my plans. Mark texted, inviting me to dinner with his family. I was no longer alone. Elizabeth and Ethan may have taken 25 years of my life, but they couldn't take my future. And as I picked up a pen, sketching the dream that had once gathered dust, I knew I was living, truly living, for the first time in years. A few weeks later, I rented a small, bright office with windows overlooking a bustling street. On the desk lay the first blueprint for my tech company, Grayson Energy, focused on renewable energy. The lines I had drawn over 20 years ago now came back to life, no longer gathering dust in the garage. Each stroke of the pen was a declaration. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The early days weren't easy. I stayed up late calling investors, pitching ideas to people who had once laughed at my dream. But then, a local startup agreed to partner with me, convinced by my plan for affordable solar panels. The first contract came after just 3 months, then a second, a third. The money wasn't much yet, but it was enough to see light at the end of the tunnel. Every morning as I stepped into the office, I felt my own pulse, a rhythm I had forgotten long ago. Daniel often stopped by, bringing coffee and silly jokes. "Dad," he said once, his eyes shining, "I've never seen you like this. It's like you're free." I smiled, patting his shoulder. Free. That was exactly it. No longer weighed down by Elizabeth, no longer shadowed by Ethan. Just me and the dream I had set aside for them. Mark and his wife Lisa helped a lot too. They introduced me to clients, invited me to dinners, and reminded me I wasn't alone. One evening, sitting in their backyard watching their kids run around, I realized I was no longer in pain. The wound was still there, but it had stopped bleeding. I had rebuilt, not a family, but a life, my life. Each day I worked, learned, and grew. I hired 2 young engineers who called me boss with respect. I was no longer someone's rock. I was Robert Grayson, a man turning his dream into reality. And when I looked out the window, seeing the sunlight bathe the city, I knew I had found myself again. Time passed quickly and the final court hearing arrived. That day, the courtroom lacked the tension of before. I sat there, Karen beside me, the stack of documents now just a formality. Elizabeth sat across from me, thinner, her eyes weary. She no longer fought back. No flustered young lawyer stood by her side. She came alone, as if she had accepted defeat. The judge flipped through the file, her voice steady. Based on the prenuptial agreement and the evidence presented, Mr. Grayson is awarded ownership of the marital home, the retirement account, and the majority of the shared assets. Mrs. Grayson has no right to appeal. Each word she spoke was a period at the end of 25 years of marriage. Elizabeth bowed her head, her hands clenched, but she said nothing. When the hearing ended, she stood and approached me. "Robert," her voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, "I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything, for Daniel. Can we?" She trailed off, her eyes pleading. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved, for whom I had sacrificed everything. But now I saw only a stranger. "Elizabeth," I said, my voice calm, "Daniel will be fine, but you and I were done." I turned and walked away, not looking back. Karen patted my shoulder, whispering, "You did great." I nodded, stepping out of the courthouse as blinding sunlight hit my face. I took a deep breath, feeling relief spread through me. Not because of the victory, but because I had set myself free. Elizabeth left carrying the baggage of a depleted bank account and a shattered reputation. I didn't know what she would do, and for the first time I didn't care. I had Daniel, Grayson energy, and a new life. As I got into my car, I knew the old chapter had closed. The new one I would write with my own hand. 6 months later, I stood on a small stage before a group of young entrepreneurs. Grayson Energy had just signed a major contract with an energy corporation, and I was invited to share my story. I looked out at the audience, seeing Daniel in the front row, smiling proudly. "I once thought my life was over," I said, my voice low but firm. "But I learned that no matter what you lose, you can rebuild better, stronger." My company now had 10 employees, an expanded office, and plans for a small factory. I no longer worked to pay debts or keep someone else happy. I worked because I wanted to, because every solar panel we installed was a piece of the dream I had once set aside. Money came, but it wasn't what I valued most. What I treasured was the look in Daniel's eyes when he said, "Dad, I'm proud of you." I started mentoring other men, those going through family crises. I listened to them, shared my story, and reminded them they were not their pain. One man told me, "Robert, you made me believe I can start over." I smiled, patting his shoulder. "Then start."